Hey gang, it's Squill. And are Jake and PB friends? I'm sure you're thinking, well, of course they are. Jake is loyal to PB in almost every episode. But really think about their dynamic for a second. How often do Jake and PB hang out without Finn? How much do Jake and PB even have in common? Bear with me here because I've been hatching up a bit of a conspiracy theory. I think Jake hates PB. At least in seasons 4 through 6. Yeah, by season 7, it's not really a thing anymore. I think they're pretty much cool with each other. And in seasons 1 through 3, PB isn't really portrayed with any negative qualities, so there really isn't much to go off of in those seasons. It's really just those middle seasons, seasons 4 through 6, where I think Jake's grudge against PB is prominent. Which makes sense seeing as these are the seasons in which PB is at her most morally questionable. I've selected 7 episodes from this chunk of the show to showcase the silent feud between Jake and PB. Everyone put on your tinfoil hats because it's conspiracy time. Episode 1, Princess Cookie. This is the first episode that came to my mind when thinking of this theory, and I'm sure it was for a lot of you guys too. The Jake and PB conflict starts pretty early on in this one. Jake wants to disguise himself as a mailman, but PB makes him be a milkman instead. I think it's interesting that there's no real reason given as to why PB wants Jake to be a milkman. Like, I don't really see how Jake's change of disguise changes the plan in any way. She just forces him to comply to how she sees him. I also find it interesting how Jake is the one to initiate the conversation between him and Baby Snaps about PB being the worst. You can argue he's doing this just to get on his good side, but there's gotta be at least some level of sincerity here, right? The way he talks about her sitting out there all safe and cozy while he's risking his life in a milkman costume. Jake clearly resonates with Baby Snap's story here about PB not letting him be who he wants, to the point where he actively disobeys PB's orders and helps him escape. I absolutely love the rebellious version of Jake we get in this episode, it's so cool. Jake is clearly just fed up with PB's shit here, taking matters into his own hands. Now, obviously PB does have a change of heart by the end of the episode, but this is still largely a Jake versus PB episode at its core, which is pretty unique for the show. Out of all the episodes on this list, this is the one where the Jake and PB conflict is at its front and center. Episode 2, Burning Low. This is another pretty big one. Everyone knows this episode for the big scene where Finn blows up at PB. But I find this scene between PB and Jake to be just as interesting. Jake very clearly sees how much of an emotional toll Finn's obsession over PB has taken on him. She has a very intentionally push and pull attitude when it comes to Finn, which helps manipulate him into being loyal to her. You can really feel that Jake has built up a resentment towards PB because of this, and now finally has the chance to release it. It's like that scene from Princess Cookie where he trash talks her, except this time it's done straight to her face. Excellent John DiMaggio performance, by the way. But even earlier in the episode, Jake is telling Finn that PB is jealous of Flame Princess. Jake obviously fell asleep while PB was explaining what's actually going on, so I like to think that Jake is spreading this lie on purpose to get back at PB. Even at the end of the episode, when Jake does have the full context, he's still teasing her about being jealous. Basically, Jake can be a little shit to PB sometimes, and I love it. This episode is clearly a case of Jake going full Big Brother mode and wanting to protect Finn's feelings. Episode 3, Wizards Only Fools. PB has a pretty massive hubris, and Wizards Only Fools is one of the greatest examples of this. He's just so gung-ho about magic being made up. Now, this one is obviously a case where both Finn and Jake are at odds against PB. But considering the fact that Jake, as far as he knows at least, is magic, it makes sense that he'd take it a bit more personally than Finn. PB totally called this reveal, by the way. PB's constant insistence that magic is made up clearly gets on Jake's nerves the more the episode goes on. I mean, I'd be pretty mad too if I got thrown in jail just because my friend couldn't say wizards rule. Granted, nothing really comes of this. Jake and PB are still on good terms by the end of the episode, but clearly some level of frustration must be there on Jake's end, right? Episode 4, James. It's really just the ending to this episode that I want to talk about. There is a scene earlier on in the episode where Jake is very clearly upset that PB won't let them explore the ruins. But that's pretty dang minor compared to PB making James sacrifice himself so the rest of them can escape. Now, this is definitely a case where both Finn and Jake are morally conflicted on PB's decision here. But Jake definitely had a stronger attachment to James, so his sacrifice clearly has a stronger impact on Jake than it does Finn. I mean, just look at how uncomfortable Jake is giving the clone James his coin back. I mean, it's one thing to make the guy sacrifice himself, but to then casually dismiss it with the reveal that you made a clone of him? That's pretty rough. Episode 5, The Tower. This one's pretty easy to ignore as it's a very Finn-centric story, but there's a pretty interesting Jake and PB subplot in this one too. Jake thinks that what Finn's doing is healthy, where PB thinks he could get hurt. They argue back and forth throughout the episode, but ultimately they're both kinda in the right. Obviously this is something that Finn needed to get out of his system, but he could have done this in a way that didn't almost lead to his death. I like that there's not even really a resolution to Jake and PB's conflict here. The episode sorta just ends. This does make sense. Again, this is a Finn-centric story at the end of the day. Jake and PB aren't really that important. I just find it interesting that the show didn't feel the need to resolve their conflict. They didn't feel the need to end the episode with Jake and PB on good terms. Episode 6, The Pajama War. Of all the episodes on this list, this is definitely the most minor example. Hell, Jake and PB barely even interact in this one, save for one line. But really think about Jake's role in this one. Jake really just exists as an agent of neutral chaos in this episode. Really just egging the candy people on and driving them more and more crazy throughout the episode. Jake knows that under most circumstances, PB would be totally against what's going on here, and yet he actively encourages it anyways. Of course, we see that PB is perfectly calm about all this, but Jake doesn't. So in a way, I almost see Jake letting the candy people tear each other apart as almost sort of an act of rebellion, akin to Princess Cookie. He knows this goes against PB's control freak nature, and he delights in it. Episode 7, Hot Diggity Doom. So this episode is really only here for one scene, but that one scene in question is very telling about how Jake feels about PB. It's near the beginning of the episode, where King Vu is holding his rally against PB, listing off all the things PB claims not to be. During the scene, Jake whispers to Finn, "This guy's really working on me." Also notice that while Finn is wearing a PB pin, Jake is not. Now, of course, this could just be a joke, and Jake is pretty loyal to PB throughout the rest of the episode. But even still, the fact that the show chose to do this joke with Jake in the first place shows that there's definitely something there between them. Jake is not completely loyal to PB, not to the same extent Finn is at least. So what's up with Jake and PB? What's their deal? When you really think about Jake and PB as characters, the two are essentially diametrically opposed to each other. We all think about Jake as this very chill, very go-with-the-flow kind of guy. Not the type to get involved in other people's lives if he doesn't have to. I mean, just look at how hands-off his approach to parenting is. Contrast this with PB, who's basically the exact opposite. She's a control freak, it's essentially her job to manipulate her citizens. Put these two very conflicting personalities in a room together and yeah, they probably wouldn't get along all too well. And you can see that in a lot of the episodes I talked about in this video. PB tries forcing her will on someone else, Jake opposes this, and that's their conflict for the episode. The two heavily clash in their worldview, which is why they make such interesting character foils. But if all this is true, why is Jake still loyal to PB? Well, here's the closest comparison I can think of. You know that Gravity Falls episode where Dipper and Robbie have that big fight? And how in the end they agree to hate each other in silence like girls do? Well, that's sorta how I see Jake and PB. Jake and PB are both people who Finn care about and who care about Finn, albeit in different ways. They're both sort of guardians to Finn in a way, so I can see them both wanting to keep Finn out of their conflicts. And thus they have a silent feud. Now granted, there are a couple more holes in my theory. The biggest knock against this theory is definitely in Too Old, where PB claims she loves Jake. Jake is very visibly confused and upset when Finn tells him she doesn't like him anymore. I can't really think of a workaround for this one. There's also, this scene in A Glitch is a Glitch. However, this is a non-canon episode, and thus I choose not to count it. But yeah, maybe saying they hate each other is a bit of a stretch. But there's definitely something there. I just know that there's some amount of blood between these two. There's just gotta be. I don't know, am I just crazy? Is there any validity to this? Y'all let me know in the comments if I am, I genuinely can't tell anymore. I haven't really heard anyone talk about this before, so I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say. Have a good one, and Squill out.